Israel has just added one more to the list, which is Morocco, the agreement with Morocco. And they have just removed one of the countries that was completely against Israel. And they are going to add one of the strongest countries in the Middle East. And that's an incredible achievement for Netanyahu's government and for the whole agreement that Donald Trump made during his time in office. That is to say, the one leaving now is Qatar. Qatar was one of those who was preventing the Middle East from having relations with Israel. And the one who is now going to join freely is Sudan, one of those who was limited, and also in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, anyone who knows the map of the Middle East knows that Saudi Arabia has a vast land area. And regarding the religious aspect, remember that Saudi Arabia has Mecca, and the Temple Mount is also one of the important places for that. And that's where there is an incredible agreement and treaty, but it will be revealed very soon about what is going to happen there. That's why this situation between Saudi Arabia and Israel had been anticipated, because they are the two key countries regarding the issue of the temple. And there is actually an agreement about that. I'll tell you a little bit more about what that agreement is going to be about and what the points are. In fact, there are some plans that are already being worked on. I'll also show you the updated plans. We received them firsthand, so I can only show them to you. However, we won't be able to send them to you as a PDF this time like we usually do, but even if we did, it would be hard for you to understand them because everything is in Hebrew for now, but it's still very interesting. At least I can explain a little bit about what's going on here in the Middle East, specifically regarding the issue of the Temple Mount. So the next time we meet, which will be the fourth part about the Temple Mount, we'll have a lot more news. Because as we started with this, it's a topic that keeps getting updated over and over again, and that's exactly what happened the last time we met. We didn't have this agreement with Morocco, we didn't have this agreement with Sudan, and much less this agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. And everything related to the whole area there, Arabia, Saudi Arabia, right? So I'll tell you a little bit about that as well, and it's really interesting, so you can also update your congregations and your people on everything that's happening. There are 4 topics we're going to cover today, and these 4 topics are what we're going to talk a little about today. One is well, actually all 4 are questions directed to you, and these 4 questions, the first one for example, pay attention to the first one. I think everyone knows it. Everyone has the answer. And it's, where did God send Abraham? Where did he go to sacrifice his son? We saw this in the first class of the Road to the Temple. And I think many of you already have it in mind, but I'll ask you later, because I want to hear what you have to say. Is it forbidden to look it up in the Bible? Try to be honest with yourselves. Don't look it up in the Bible now while you have time. And don't go to Google to search either. Where did God send Abraham to sacrifice his son? Because there are many people who believe something, but the truth is, when they actually see what really happened, they end up surprised. So we want to make sure that both you and us are truly speaking exactly the same language so we can keep moving forward. Also regarding that point, because that's something very, very fundamental, because today's conflict also depends on that. That is, this whole conflict about the issue of the third temple is also related to that, right? The conflict about the issue of the third temple is also related to the answer to that question, but we're gonna talk a little about that as well. And the second point we're going to address is about the place. In Hebrew, the word for place is makom. When we say makom in Hebrew, we're saying place, but within the Hebrew language. The Jewish people have an understanding, maybe different. And why do I say different? Because the Jewish understanding of the term makom, of the term place, hasn't arrived. or it hasn't been interpreted in the Spanish language And I say this because we can see it in the Bible as well, that it hasn't been brought into the Spanish language in the Bible. And in fact, we've heard many times about this term, place, and we don't understand what its meaning is. Today I'll also explain this meaning and why it's important. Once you grasp this, you'll be able to understand the scriptures in a different way, because every time you find that term in the scriptures, you'll see specifically what the Bible is talking about and who exactly the scriptures are referring to when they're talking about place. We'll also discuss whether all Jews are waiting for the temple to be built, a common question. And a lot of people sometimes think that all of Israel and all the Jews who are in the diaspora, remember we talked a little about the diaspora, what it was, are they all wishing for and pushing for the construction of the temple? Let's see if this is true. And today we're also going to look at some of the practices that are carried out. To be specific, we'll look at just one of them, because in reality there are many, but many of them are problematic. And I'll tell you why they're problematic and why they cause a lot of conflict, even in the democratic country we live in today. So there is one that is done publicly, but we're going to look at it in light of the scriptures and what happened in the world. The New Testament completely cancels out this practice that is being used today. That is, to this day they keep doing it, but it's something that is ultimately sealed in the New Testament. We're going to show you today as well when exactly this is sealed in the New Testament. But as usual, when we're talking about the topic of the temple, I always show you a short video about something related to the topic of the temple. I want you to pay attention. This video isn't long, it's only 2 minutes. You don't have to read this time. In previous times, you always had to keep up with the reading. This time you don't have to read, it's just images that you're going to see. But the images are really interesting because maybe they don't have much to do with building or construction or with a rock or with archaeology. It's not directly related, but it's about daily life. Maybe, but with an act that is performed only once in a lifetime, not only in the life of the Jewish people, but in the lives of many people, which is the nuptial act. That is something that is performed only once among the Jewish people. Many people say yes, but you are also allowed, like the Arabs, to get married several times. No, the Jewish people can only get married once, no more. Obviously, divorce exists here too, and divorce is not pleasant at all, because divorce, even the way it's done, is also done publicly. And it's done almost the same people who were invited to the wedding are invited to the divorce. And the rabbi comes and stands there in public and says, this man is now free to marry whoever he wishes. And this woman is free to marry whoever she wishes. And you, those who were witnesses at the wedding when it took place, are now witnesses that both are free. It's kind of a strange thing, but nowadays that's practiced here. But there's also a key thing that at one point started as a practice, but it developed and turned into a tradition. And nowadays, it's one of the fundamental things that every couple has to do at their wedding. Pay attention to it. Watch the video and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Very good. There were several elements that maybe you are used to seeing at a wedding. Thank you. Not Jewish, for example, the dress, the white dress, the groom's suit, and a few other things. But if you paid attention, I don't know if any of you have ever been to a Jewish wedding, but notice that there is a chuppah, which is the protection. There is also the tallit, and also, I don't know if you noticed that the bride, for example, has to circle the groom 7 times. And they also practice something like a kind of holy supper. I don't know if you also saw that both of them shared from one cup. It's not a holy supper, obviously. But there's a certain moment, which is the main moment in the whole wedding. It's the breaking of the cup. This breaking of the cup is very, 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 very important. Okay? Now, why is it key? And what does the breaking of the glass represent? The breaking of the glass represents the destruction of the temple. That is, remember that for almost 2,000 years, the Jewish people have not had a temple. No, for now, no, there is no temple, and it is the desire of all the Jewish people to rebuild the third temple. Let me correct myself. I said all Jewish people want to rebuild the third temple, at least during the wedding. At the time of the wedding, everyone, guests, the groom, the bride, everyone present shows at least the desire to rebuild the third temple. That's why the question at the end is, how many more glasses still need to be broken? It's time to build, and there are 2 different organizations, strong today in Israel, that are working very hard for the reconstruction of the next temple in the city of Jerusalem. And that's why notice that even in the main part,
principal.
to get to tell you the most important part of a person's life, which is the act of marriage, the temple is present. The temple comes in. Notice the importance that the Jewish people give to the subject of the temple. That is to say, it's something that comes in right from there, and it's something that will accompany you throughout your entire life. Now, it's not exactly known when it began. This is a practice that ends up becoming an inseparable wedding tradition. Absolutely every wedding, whether one believes in the God of Israel or not, but if they are Jewish, they must go through a rabbinical wedding. There is no such thing here as a non-rabbinical civil wedding. It's not like you can just go to a civil registry, register, and be done. A rabbi is needed for the marriage to be approved as a marriage, and the rabbi is the one who determines that the wedding must meet certain requirements, and the fundamental requirement is the breaking of the glass. The glass breaking must always happen no matter what. That is to say, the subject of the temple is always remembered, and more precisely, it is at the moment when they swear to fulfill their vows for life that the temple is present. So notice why it is so important. The question is, for the Jewish people, this thing about the temple. Many of us know why the subject of the temple is so important for the Jewish people, but perhaps we don't know too much about its depth. Remember that I asked you where God sent Abraham to sacrifice his son. And let's see what you all think. What can you tell me? If you want, some of you can turn on your microphone and tell me where God sent Abraham to sacrifice his son, where God sent Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Is anyone willing to give me an answer? Yes.
Yes, brother. Where is the temple? Where? Let's write it on Mount Moriah.
Mount Moriah. Everyone agrees that it's Mount Moriah from what I see. Are you certain about what you're saying?
That's what the Bible says.
That's what you said.
Is that what the Bible says?
No. Yes.
Yes.
And what does it say in Hebrew?
Yes and no.
What does the Hebrew say?
What does the Hebrew say? What does the Hebrew say? And what does the Spanish say? The Spanish says the same thing as the Hebrew, interestingly, in that part. Now I'm going to tell you, look, that image you have there, but they all agree that it was Mount Moriah, according to them. That's how I understand it, yes. That thing I wanted to clarify with the microphone off. I said I'd better not risk it because I don't want to make a mistake, but let's go with Mount Moriah. So let's go with the topic of Mount Moriah. Let's see if it really was Mount Moriah, or if it wasn't, yes.
Yes, all right, Mount Moriah.
Let's see it. Let's see it then. That's why we're here, all of us to learn. And if I say something wrong, then they'll turn off my monitor, they'll turn off my microphone, and that's it, now that I'm teaching anything. But I'm not going to tell you, the Bible is going to tell you. Look at what the Bible is going to say. That image you have there in front of you, you can see it the next time you visit Israel. You will go to the Israel Museum, and in the Israel Museum, you will find and see this incredible model. Not all groups visit the Israel Museum, but if you have the chance and your group doesn't have the Israel Museum on the itinerary, try to make some time during the day, maybe during lunch or on your free day, and sneak away to the Israel Museum. And try to see this model because it's incredible what you can learn there. If you go with the group, that's excellent, much better. But if you don't go with the group, try to go on your own. AM, in this model, it's a model with a scale of 1 to 50 and 1 centimeter equals 50 meters. And it represents Jerusalem during the time of the Second Temple. We're talking about Herod's temple, the one built by the Romans. That is, you can see it here in the construction. What you're seeing here in the front, what I'm pointing at with the mouse, is what's known as the City of David. Here, pay attention because we're going to talk about it at the end of the class. About this pool here called the Pool of Siloam, because the Pool of Siloam was very important. Not only in the Old Testament, but it was also very important for one of the practices that had to be performed for the temple. That is, the Pool of Siloam was always key. In fact, Jesus appeared 3,000 years later to break a curse that had been placed on King David here. Do you remember when Jesus sent the blind man to be healed? He tells him, "Go and wash yourself in the Pool of Siloam." And here they had placed a curse on King David, where it was said, "Neither the blind nor the lame will take the city, and they will remain that way." And for 3,000 years, no one wanted to enter this area because there was a curse of blindness. That is, there were blind people here. So Jesus himself comes and says, "Go and wash yourself in the Pool of Siloam, in the place that was cursed." This is what the Lord did. And then he breaks that curse that was there, right? Now, why does he do that in this place? Because obviously it was one of the most important places for one of the practices of the Jewish people, which is still celebrated to this day. And we're going to see that. Why is it so important and how Jesus ends up giving an incredible teaching in front of all the people who were present. Exactly, during one of the most important festivals for the Jewish people, one of the 3 most important festivals for the Jewish people, which had to be related to the topic of the Third Temple. Everything you see is the city as it looked back then. Now, this temple that appears here wasn't there in King David's time, okay? It did not appear with Abraham. But yes, this whole site, for example, look, right here where my cursor is known as Mount Zion. Even though today, as you can see, it looks like everything is flat, but in reality, it's not flat, or it wasn't flat back then. Here there's a valley, a very large valley, which is called the Kidron Valley in Hebrew, or the Sidron Valley. Here is the Valley of Hinnom, and down here you can see there are some tunnels, like little holes. This is called the Tyropaian Valley. It's interesting, because I think at some point, I don't know if I mentioned it to you, here it forms the Hebrew letter called Shin. Shin stands for Shaddai, the name of God, and the Lord says, "My name will remain eternally in the city of Jerusalem." That is, the 3 valleys are forming the initial of the name of God, Shaddai. What the Lord did with that is incredibly amazing, isn't it? I mean, how he thought of that. But here, notice that here would be, for example, Mount Zion, and here would be what you call Mount Moriah, where God sent Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, okay? So this is supposedly the place where God sends Abraham go to Mount Moriah. Now, Mount Moriah, just so you know, appears in the scriptures in the book of Chronicles. Not before. And you can look it up. In 2 Chronicles chapter 3 verse 1 it says, Solomon began to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. Now, why does it say the house of the Lord in Jerusalem? Is there a term for the Hebrew people from the Hebrew language that in ancient times, what housed God's presence, what was, so to speak, God's temporary dwelling on earth, was the tabernacle. What we know as the tabernacle of the temple, which is the tabernacle of Moshe. In other words, in the Hebrew language, it is called Mishkan. Mishkan is where the presence was. But in the Hebrew language, the temple is called Beit HaMikdash. That is, when we talk about a temple, we are talking about a building. But we're not saying much, we're just calling a building a temple. But there are temples in many places. But there is only one that is called Beit HaMikdash, which is called the Holy House. Okay, the Holy House. Look, to build the house of Jehovah in Jerusalem. That is the Holy House in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah. Up to that point, we all agree that Mount Moriah appears, which had been shown to David, his father, in the place that David had prepared in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. Where are you going to find this? You will find this in 1 Chronicles chapter 21. That's where the Bible tells us that David has that encounter with the angel, and finally the angel tells him, come here and offer a burnt offering at the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite, where King David goes and buys the threshing floor of Ornan Hernan the Jebusite, and that's where it says, here then will be the house of God. The house of God, pay attention, not the temple. That is, when we use the term temple in the Spanish language, we are moving away from the original concept, which was the term used in the Hebrew language from the Old Testament. Today, temple is widely used because it has already been Romanized. In fact, when you hear the Jewish people speak in their original language, in Hebrew, they will always say Beit HaMikdash, they will always say the Holy House. They will never say temple, because there is no term for Beit HaMikdash, for the Holy House, as temple, as such. It was simply carried over into Spanish, and that's how it stayed. Now let's see if it was truly where God told Abraham to go and sacrifice his son Isaac. In Genesis, when we see this event, chapter 22, it says, after these things happened, God tested Abraham and said to Abraham, and he answered, here I am. And he said, take now your son, your only one, Isaac, whom you love, and go. Where does it say? To the land of Moriah. Aha! Does it say Mount Moriah? It says to the land of Moriah. I don't know if we've ever paid attention to that. The Spanish translation is exactly as it says in the Hebrew language. In the Hebrew language, it says Eretz Moriah, that is, the land of Moriah, and it says, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will tell you about. He is not saying Mount Moriah. And forgive me for what I just told you, but we're here to learn, right? Mount Moriah will only appear later in the book of Chronicles. When the Lord is telling Abraham, go and sacrifice him, he is saying, go to the land of Moriah. Where was the land of Moriah? Obviously, it was this whole area that we're seeing here in the image. But exactly which one was the mountain? That's the question. So, was it exactly this one? Because nowadays we have the big conflict. with the dome of the rock that is located on Mount Moriah, where it is said the foundation stone is found inside the golden dome, okay? Are you following me so far? Well, inside the golden dome is the foundation stone. What is said about the foundation stone? That it was the place where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac. And from there then begins that concept that Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac on Mount Moriah. The Bible tells us it was in the land of Moriah. Now, on one of the mountains, from here it's quite complicated to be able to determine if it is truly Mount Moriah where the sacrifice was going to take place, or if it is the neighboring mountain. But what's interesting here, and to put everyone's doubts to rest, is that each mountain has its own name. And the only one called Mount Moriah is this one, where today the Golden Dome stands. Because here we have Mount Zion, in front we have the Mount of Olives, nearby we have Mount Scopus, and so on. Each mountain has its own name. The only place that was named Mount Moriah is exactly where the house of God was built. So it follows by deduction that possibly the place where Abraham was going to sacrifice to God, one of the mountains in the land of Moriah, was what was left here. Why? Because later on we will find in the scriptures that this whole area where the city of David was located was the city of the Jebusites, and in ancient times this area was called Salem. So Salem and the land of Moriah were neighbors. That is, the land of Moriah was located in this area. And one of the highest mountains, or one of the mountains that were there, was exactly Mount Moriah. But I'm just telling you this to try to correct the vocabulary in the future and not quickly go out and say Mount Moriah was where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac. Because you're going to run into a Jew who knows the scriptures, who knows the Old Testament, and he's going to say, what are you telling me? If Mount Moriah wasn't where, show me that it really was Mount Moriah. He's going to say, no, it was in the land of Moriah. That later we come to the conclusion that it was Mount Moriah. Yes, we can come to that conclusion according to the book of Chronicles and according to what will happen in the future with the temple. But if it can be stated, it's also difficult to state it. Be careful with that, because it's also very difficult to truly affirm that this is the place. That's why when you go and tell the Arabs, no, that's where Abraham was going to sacrifice his son, there's no foundation for that. So, today as well, that's why the conflict exists. This is to help understand the conflict over establishing a valid claim to that piece of land. Whether it truly belongs to the Jewish people or it doesn't belong to the Jewish people. Or simply that area doesn't, but the area about 10 or 15 meters to the right or to the left does belong to the Jewish people. What we have very clear here is that Mount Moriah belongs to the Jewish people from the point of view that the house of God was built there. Okay? But we cannot determine if this Mount Moriah, where the house of God was also exactly the physical space of Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac. And this is important because this will be a doctrinal issue of conflict in the future. Now, let's understand a little bit about what I'm telling you here about the place. Because it's also important, and in Spanish, sometimes something that's said in Hebrew hasn't completely made its way into Spanish. And it's not that you're going to learn Hebrew right now, right? We're not going to have a Hebrew class about this. I'm just going to give you a little tip here, but it's a tip that will help you a lot in your future understanding of the scriptures. In the Midrash, we talked in previous classes about what the Midrash was. Remember that we also talked about how it is one of the books that accompanies the Jewish people in the religion of Judaism. Just like the Talmud, which is what accompanies them, unlike the Torah. The Torah is what is known as the Pentateuch, okay? And the Torah is also what we have, that is the first 5 books of Moses. Tanakh is what we have too, it's the whole Old Testament. But the Talmud is not, it's something else. And the Midrash is something else. They are rabbinic books. For example, the Talmud is something that was written in the Babylonian era, and later on, some modifications were made during the time of the Second Temple. The Midrash is also from that same period. But it says the following tells us there is a commentary in the Midrash, and the commentary is by Rabbi Yuna, a rabbi named Junah. He speaks in the name of Rabbi Ami, and he says the following. He says, "Why is God called by the name place?" Pay attention to this. Why is God called by the name place? May come in Hebrew. The answer is, as the rabbi says, because God is the place of the world. But his world is not his place. It was clear. That is, God is the place of the world. But his world is not his place. Now, God has no physical limitation. We know that he is omnipotent and omnipresent. The Jewish people understand the same thing. For the Jewish people, God is present at all times and in all places. Therefore, God is place, but the place of this world is not of God. That is to say, he cannot be in this place because this world is not holy enough for God to dwell in it. Specifically, human beings do need a space. Human beings do have limitations, but not God. So in the concept of the Jewish people, God is place. But since he has no place, remember that God himself determined to have only one place to dwell on the face of the earth. And that one place was determined to be in the house of God. Holy. How does the book of Chronicles say it? On Mount Moriah. So that's why Mount Moriah is so respected by the Jewish people, because it's the only place that God himself, being the place, chooses to manifest himself. He decides to dwell there, and it says that he will dwell in that place, because he sends King David, go and prepare yourself. Okay. He tells him, you're not going to do it. Solomon will. And Shlomo, when he does it, then the Bible tells us that the presence of God was there, and that the presence of God even remained in the Holy of Holies. Remember that once a year, the high priest had to go in there and perform the purification. For all the Jewish people, for everyone who was present there. Now we have always learned, or a lot in the world, according to the Spanish language, and we're not going to blame any Bible translated into Spanish. It's simply a Jewish concept about the understanding that God is a place. In fact, Maykom is one of the names of God. Place is one of the names of God in the thinking of the Jewish people. Therefore, every time you find something in the scriptures that is related to place, it is referring to God. And you remember, maybe many of you who are pastors here, you have said at some point, I hope you haven't gotten ahead of yourselves. And if you did say it, try to correct it next time. But many say that in the book of Esther, the name of God does not appear. Have you ever heard that? The only book that does not have the name of God is the book of Esther. That's what people said a lot. But the name of God is there. Because in Jewish understanding, one of God's names is Place Makom. Look at what it says in the book of Esther, chapter 4, verse 14. And I put several versions here for you because not all versions translate exactly the same. The first version says, because if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will come from what? Another what? Place. For the Jews. Mordecai is speaking here. And he is speaking to Esther. Mordecai was a Jew. Esther was a Jew. Her name was Hadassah. He is telling her the place. He is telling her, if you don't speak, help will come. From whom? From God. For the Jews. But you and your father's house will perish. Another version says, if you stay silent now, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from elsewhere. See how the translation changed. They put part instead of place. Why? Because the Jewish interpretation or understanding of the Hebrew scripture was not conveyed. In Hebrew scripture, ha-place, Makom, is one of the names of God. And that's also what is understood and what was written and applied in the Midrash. And why is it one of the names of God? Because God specifically chose to have his house on Mount Moriah. And that's where in the Hebrew language it changes so that the place represents God. God, who has no limitations, comes and dwells in this place. So God is place. Place is equal to God for the Jewish people, and that's how you will see it in other translations. In fact, most people have the Reina Valera 1960. Note that in the last part it says, if you stay silent now, relief and deliverance will come from elsewhere. It also says, it doesn't say the place. But when it mentions the place, remember that it's referring to God here. That is, don't say anymore that the name of God doesn't exist in the book of Esther. Now you have to explain that the name of God is indeed in the book of Esther and the translation from the Hebrew language. One of the names of God is Makom, and place is the name of God. Why is place one of the names of God? Because it is presence. It is the place where one wants to be, where the presence becomes visible, where the presence becomes permanent. Remember that at one point in the New Testament, the Bible tells us that Jesus is transfigured and that some disciples were there. So when they come closer and say to him, let's make shelters here. Do you remember? Why? Because they had experienced the presence. That is, they wanted to stay in that place. Why don't we stay here in this place? That is, let's make a shelter here for you, another for Elijah, and another for Moses. In other words, this is where we want to stay. Why? Because they had experienced the presence manifesting before them. That is, God being the place, was making himself present there in front of all of them. And that was what the Jewish people experienced every time they had to visit the temple in the city of Jerusalem. And they did it 3 times. 3 times a year. 3 times a year it was mandatory for the Jewish people to come to the city of Jerusalem. One of the questions we had at the beginning is whether all Jews are waiting for the construction of the 3rd temple. I mean, because sometimes many of those out there say all the Jews are waiting for the 3rd temple to be built and want it, and the answer is no. Not all Jews are waiting for the construction of the 3rd temple. Not all Jews want the temple to be built. And I'm gonna tell you that there is a disagreement regarding how, for example, the reconstruction should be carried out, and what kind of worship should be offered, and why does this happen? Because there are different doctrinal currents today within Judaism. That is to say, in this period of these 2,000 years that the Jewish people have been dispersed, different interpretations have been generated and created, and each interpretation brought with it a new current. And each current has its own different strength of power, influence, and finances. For example, it says there that the Orthodox authorities generally believe that the reconstruction should take place in the era of the Jewish Messiah, known as Messiah ben David. The Messiah, son of the house of David. That's what the Orthodox who believe in the Messianic era believe. Okay? Those are the ones you mentioned, but this has already been fulfilled. It has already been fulfilled. Messiah ben David. We are talking about the Messiah Yeshua, Jesus. But for the Orthodox, and for many of them at least, the Messiah has not come yet because they have not recognized that the Messiah ben David, the one who came 2,000 years ago, was exactly the one they are supposed to be waiting for. They say no, that was not the Messiah, and to this day the same spirit that existed 2,000 years ago still exists, where there is still denial of the Messiah ben David. Another position, and a very small one, follows the teachings of Maimonides. What did they say? They believed that the Jews should strive for the reconstruction of the temple whenever possible. That is, not through wars, not through conflicts, not through fights, but by promoting it. That is, in the reconstruction of a physical temple. Some, as we said, want to wait for the Messianic era. That is, when the Messiah is present, then he himself will rebuild the temple and recover the city of Jerusalem. And others say no, for that to happen, we have to make an effort. For the Messiah to come, we first have to rebuild the temple. Then the Messiah will come. There is another Orthodox religious position that says the temple will descend from heaven. And you will see them in their synagogues offering prayers, asking the Lord to send the temple from heaven. They call it send the Beit HaMikdash from the Shemaim. May he send the house of God, the temple from heaven. They believe it. They believe that it will come just like that. Physically, it will land from the sky and rest on Mount Moriah. It's also a position that exists within the Jewish people and within the Orthodox community. And there's another position that accepts and acknowledges the reconstruction of the temple. That is, they do accept and acknowledge that the third temple should be built, but they reject the practice of sacrifices. Why do they reject the practice of sacrifices? Because they believe that the sacrifices that were made in ancient times don't necessarily have to be done today. For example, the issue of animal slaughter. So they are against animal cruelty and all those sacrifices of applying the blood, removing the blood, doing this, roasting the animal, making ashes. Everyone, remember that there were many issues they had that were related to animal sacrifices. So there are many groups within the Jewish people who reject the idea of sacrifices, but they do accept the reconstruction of the temple. That is, they don't want to see it, but they don't want the practices to be carried out. So specifically regarding the reconstruction of the third temple, the people are actually very divided, contrary to what many people believe, that the entire Jewish people are longing for the reconstruction of the third temple. No, that's not the case. While some of them are pushing more, and what you see is that there is a much stronger push, and it has to do, as I said before, with the influence they have and their financial power. Just so you have an idea, today we're going to talk a little about that, about the utensils that had to be made from scratch. There are already many utensils that were in the second temple, in the first temple, that had to be made completely from scratch, just as they were specified in the book of Leviticus, and they were costly. As of today, the investment that was made was approximately $30 million. Imagine the amount of money that was invested to recover some items, according to the book of Leviticus. So that when the third temple is rebuilt, these utensils can be there inside. And others obviously were also recovered and restored. In fact, even the garments for the priests cost a lot of money. They're already there, but the cost of the garments was approximately $145,000. We're going to talk to you a little about that as well, about all of that. There's something here regarding what I was telling you about the practices. What kind of practices are carried out today in the present state of Israel? Israel in the year 2021, Gregorian calendar. What kind of practices are carried out nowadays? There's one that is the most accepted by the majority. Do you remember? One of the big debates is the issue of practices regarding sacrifices. Although there are sacrificial practices in the territory of Samaria, the practice of sacrifices is carried out, for example, with lambs. There is a sacrifice of lamb. But there's no lamb sacrifice on the Temple Mount. We saw that ourselves last time, how some Orthodox tried to enter Mount Moriah to be able to perform the sacrifice of the lamb. And they wanted to be the first after 2,000 years to have a sacrifice of the lamb inside Mount Moriah. And that creates a lot of conflict. And that happens every year. Every year that is attempted there on Mount Moriah. But there is a festival that is public and accepted by the majority. Look, at this little video you have there in front of you, notice, for example, this gentleman. Remember I said the Pool of Siloam was important. At the Pool of Siloam, what are you seeing in the image? It's a march that takes place every year for one of the important festivals in the people of Israel. Remember that there are 3 important festivals that God had established. We're talking about Passover. We're talking about Shavuot, Pentecost, and we're talking about Sukkot, Tabernacles. This parade that you are seeing on the screen is one of the festivities related to the festival of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. And one of the practices that was done in the time of the Second Temple, in the time of Herod, was what was known as the water libation. I don't know if you have ever heard this term before. It was a practice that was done, the practice of the water libation. It's called Nisuj Hamaim in the Hebrew language. What was Nisuj Hamaim? Remember, the Feast of Tabernacles lasts for 7 days, but there is one day that is called the Great Day of the Feast. That is the 8th day. Now, during the 7 days, what happened was that the priest, along with other priests, had to go down from Mount Moriah to the Pool of Siloam. And you saw that they had something like a pitcher. They had to fill that pitcher with water and begin this procession that you are seeing once again. They had to go up from the Pool of Siloam, which was located at the base of the city of David, where the Jebusites used to live, and they had to go up to Mount Moriah. Notice, there they have a kind of altar, an imitation of the altar as it was in the temple. That is, at that time, the priests had to reach the area of the temple. Do you see that altar they have there? That altar is very similar to what was found in the area of the temple. Notice that they have 2 jars there. One of the jars has water, which is the water libation, and the other has wine. There are 2 jars, and both jars have to be poured by 2 priests. But at the same time, it was a practice. Here they are doing it as a kind of simple demonstration, but when it comes time to do it for real, it has to be very, very, very strict and very, very precise. You can see there how the priests are blessing the people every time they finish performing the water libation. What was this water libation? What are we talking about here? Perhaps for many of you, this is the first time you're hearing that during the time of Tabernacles, during Sukkot, there was a practice called the water libation ceremony. Notice that what you do see every time there's a Feast of Tabernacles, you see people, or you see the Jews when they go to the synagogue with these branches they have in their hands. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but during a Feast of Tabernacles, you'll always see Jews going to the synagogue carrying what looks like a small fruit, kind of like a lemon, called an etrog, and another thing which is some branches. In the book of Leviticus, you'll find that these are the 4 plants. And the 4 plants are called Etz Etzadar, which are the citrus trees, Temarim, which are the palm trees, Etz Etzavat, which are the thick or leafy trees, and Arvanahal. Arvanahal, which are the willows of the brook or the valley. In the Talmudic tradition, it is exactly what you see in the images, what you see today among the Jewish people when they take them to the synagogue. It's not exactly what the book of Leviticus says. In the book of Leviticus in ancient times, it wasn't exactly like what we see today. That's why a lot of people sometimes get confused and say, hey, wait a minute, there are many practices that Jews do that we Christians don't do. It's that many practices that Jews do aren't based on the scriptures either. They're not based on Leviticus, but on Talmudic tradition. The Talmudic tradition identifies the fruits look like the etrog, which is the citron fruit, which is kind of like a type of lemon. The lulav, you may have heard about the lulav, and a lot of people sometimes go and buy the lulav, which is this little plant, the green one, right? It's a palm branch. Then there's the hadas, which are the leaves of the myrtle tree, and the arava, which are willow branches. These are 4 little branches that are put together in this lulav so that people can wave it. And what they're trying to do is a kind of Masira offering. That happened during the time of the Feast of Tabernacles. Now pay close attention to what I'm going to tell you, because this is really, 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 really important, because it's also related to the life of the temple. This practice is done because they want to recover the temple and they want to encourage and motivate. And to encourage the rest of the people who do not agree with the practices of animal sacrifice. a.m. that the temple is something important, like, for example, when we hear about the topic of marriage, which is the breaking of the glass, it's something that's related to the subject. Yes, you don't see it on the screen because the video has already ended. But now you will receive this anyway, and you can watch it again later, okay? In your free time at home, you can watch the video more calmly. So they do this specifically to say, look, this practice is important, just like breaking the glass is important. Why is this important? Because we need the temple to be built. Once the temple is built, the water libation is something that will be done inside. Now, what was the water libation? What was all this representation about? The priests would do this, going down to the pool of Siloam, then coming back up to the area of Mount Moriah, entering the place where the altar was, and performing the water libation. They had to pour water, and they had to pour wine, and both had to be on the altar at exactly the same time. That was done every day at sunset for 7 days. In the book by Flavius Josephus, it is said that Jerusalem at that time was lit up. It looked like daytime because bonfires were also lit and the whole festival was brilliantly lit. Jesus tells us in the book of John, chapter 7, write it down, verse 2, that he was at the Feast of Tabernacles in the city of Jerusalem. The water libation was an activity that the Jewish people did back then, and it was to have a year blessed with rain. They understood that by pouring the water for them meant moving the water. Here on earth, to stir the waters on earth and wait for God to send the rain. So they said we have to do our part. And what we can do here is stir the waters, bring them to the temple, offer the libation, offer the water offering. Celebrate and trust that God will send us a year of rain and a year of blessing. The Feast of Tabernacles for the Jewish people always represents the water festival. Why? Because it is the time when it is determined that God will send them a year of rain. In fact, in the book of Zechariah, you will find that during the Feast of Tabernacles, the very prophet is saying that when the Messiah is in Jerusalem, in the city of Jerusalem, it says that he will not send rain to those nations that have not come to Jerusalem to worship. Notice that rain is always linked to the Feast of Tabernacles. During these 7 days, that was done, and on the 8th day, which is called the Great Day of the Feast, they waited. That is, all the people were in the city of Jerusalem, the priests, the Levites, keeping silent, waiting for the first rain. That is, for 7 days they performed the water pouring ritual, and on the 8th day they waited for the rain. Notice what happens in the book of John, verse 37. This is incredible because you'll fully understand it by knowing what was and is happening among the Jewish people. It says that on the last and greatest day of the feast, Jesus stood up and raised his voice, saying, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink." Do you understand what Jesus is doing? The last and great day of the feast, that is, it was the 8th day when all the people were present waiting for the rain. For 7 days, they performed the water libation, and on the 8th day, God was supposed to send the rain, that is, the blessing would come. For them, it represented the blessing, and Jesus... no. What he did was very bold. He stood up on the last and greatest day of the feast, raised his voice, and said, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scriptures say, rivers of living water will flow from within them." He is talking about the importance of water, the importance of thirst, the importance of blessing. Whoever believes in me, as the scriptures say, rivers of living water will flow from within them. He said this about the Spirit that those who believed in him were to receive. For the Holy Spirit had not yet come because Jesus had not yet been glorified. That is, when he is giving those words there, he is giving them at a time when that ritual in the temple was extremely important to the Jewish people because they were waiting for the rain to come. And he goes and says, I am the representation of water. In other words, whoever is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. I am the blessing. Why are you waiting for a physical blessing of rain to bless yourselves and bless the land? Specifically, from the moment Jesus said those words, a few years went by, and the practice of the water libation in the physical temple stopped being done. There was no longer a temple. It was over. That is, Jesus finished fulfilling or somehow sealing this practice. But after 2,000 years, that is, without a temple anymore. Once the state of Israel was reestablished in 1948, part of the Jewish people wanted to return to the practice again. And they are those who believe in the coming of the Messiah. And then they begin with the movement of the practices. And I say this and I bring this to you in today's class so that you can try to interpret it yourselves. It's not meant to be a topic for debate or anything like that. But many things that people are doing today regarding the reconstruction of the third temple, they are very, 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 very far from what the scriptures actually tell us. That is to say, many of the things from the Old Testament have already been sealed with the New Testament. But since they have not seen the light of the Messiah, then it is the interest, the challenge, or the desire of the Jewish people for the third temple to be rebuilt. And many believers also join in asking when the third temple will be built, when the third temple will be built, when the third temple will be built. Although it is important for the third temple to be built, and I always end up saying the same thing, it is important for it to be built. Because the Bible tells us that there will indeed be a temple at the end of times. But aren't the practices that will be carried out there important for the believers in the Messiah? That is to say, everything that is done there, and everything the priests or the Levites are going to do, no longer represents anything. That is to say, the Messiah who came 2,000 years ago has already fulfilled absolutely everything that needed to be fulfilled. So for believers, while it's important to see the building because it means seeing the scriptures fulfilled, it's not as important what happens there. It's simply about praying so that the Jewish people can truly see what happened. Because one of the things that will surprise the people is that when they start with all those practices, what happened in the first temple won't happen. In other words, the manifestation that appeared in the first temple won't happen in that temple because the Bible no longer says so. The Bible doesn't say that it will happen again. In other words, it's all part of a timeline, but somehow they got stuck in time. Very well, so this is where we end today's class. I truly hope I have been a blessing and that you were able to learn a lot in today's class. Next time we meet, we will talk a little about the role of prayer among the Jewish people according to Orthodox Judaism. That is, what effect prayer has in relation to the temple for Orthodox Jews. What happens regarding the protection of the priests and the Levites? Which utensils were found and which ones were restored? Which ones were made from scratch, and what are the plans for the future temple? A lot of what is happening these days regarding treaties has changed the structure a bit there on Mount Moriah. And there is a lot of news related to the period we are in now. That is, how times are accelerating. It's incredible. And we are going to talk about the possible period for the reconstruction of the future third temple. That is, when it could happen and what are the dates that are being considered and talked about nowadays. So don't miss it. Write it down here. The next class will be on February 4th, which will be part 4 of 4. With this, we are finishing the topic of the third temple. So that's going to be really interesting. Also remember that all those who are not yet part of the Academy can become part of the Academy, and for that you can access unlimited material. All those who want to all those who want to access unlimited material have the possibility. Look, nowadays, the fact that you can't get on a plane and fly to Israel is not a limitation. You can still learn about what's happening in Israel. And about the secrets of the Bible that could only be possible when you visited Israel physically. So now from here, we can somehow bring Israel to your home virtually, and you can learn much more about Israel. And the benefit is also that you can repeat the classes because they are recorded. Something that can even be much more beneficial than when you actually visited physically. Remember, when you visited physically, you had to be behind us, back there. Also, many guides or the teachers or professors who were teaching you about the land and archaeology. And trying to run to see what it says. Or if you missed something, well, you would ask someone else because it was a group of people. So in this way, really, I think it's a blessing and it's a privilege that many can have. Take advantage of it now because we honestly don't know how much longer. We are also going to continue with everything virtual, but for now, it's a privilege that you can have. And notice that there you have 3 types of possibilities so you can participate. There is what we call Aleph student member, Beth student member, and Gimel student member. These are not vowels, they are consonants from the Hebrew language. Aleph is like an A, Beth is a B, and Gimel is like a G. That is A like a C actually. It's ABC. It's Aleph, Beth, Gimel, right? So notice that in Aleph mode you have 16 classes, that's 2 modules. Each little thing you have up here, this represents a module. Here there are 2 modules. These 2 modules are 16 classes, and you have 12 webinars. You have free access to the webinars, and this costs $12 per month. Just $12 per month is the only investment you have to make to be able to learn about Israel and receive a certificate for each module. In this case, you will have 2 certificates for the topics that will be inside these modules. You also have the bet mode, which offers more classes for those who have more time and can study more. So, it's $24 a month when I talk about more time. Notice that it's 32 classes in 12 months. In addition to the 12 webinars, we're talking about 32 plus 12, that's 44 classes. It's something that really, if you have the time and you can do it, go ahead, because it's a privilege. And remember that here you also receive, in this case, a Hebrew-Spanish Bible. You receive this after being a member for 4 or 5 months. And here is also the Gimel membership, which is obviously the most recommended. Why? Because it has 48 classes, 6 modules, and you get access to 12 webinars. Also, each one has 12 webinars, but in this one you have 48 classes. And the classes here are classes that, unfortunately, those who are in Aleph and Bet SC Beth obviously don't have access to. They can't access what's here. And in addition to that, you also have a Hebrew-Spanish Bible just like in the Beth mode. You get a 25% discount on in-person trips starting next year, and starting this year, from June onward, we're going to launch a schedule of possible physical trips to Israel. And you can choose which date you have available to join and come here together with us. And you will get a 25% discount on the physical trip here in Israel, just for being a member here. And also you receive a shofar as a gift. What is a shofar? It's a ram's horn. You also get it as a gift for being members here, students in this module. Also, if you are pastors or leaders, remember that you can also train and equip your church. Many pastors today wonder and know that Israel is important, but they don't know what to do with it. That is, they don't know how to teach it. They know it's important, but at the same time, it's also complex. So we are here to help you. We are here and we offer everything that the Lord has placed in us so that we can be a blessing in your life. pastors, leaders, and even for yourselves so that you have authority when speaking about Israel. We are here to help you, train you, and guide you hand in hand to a new, revelatory knowledge of the scriptures from Israel, from a perspective of believers to believers. So don't miss this opportunity. Be part of Elon Academy. Elon, sign up. We're in January. Try to sign up so you can start at the beginning of the year. And when the year ends, you will be experts in the Bible and more specifically in topics related to Israel. How do you do this? You have to go to the website shown there on the screen, www.israeladora.com, Land Academy / that is, this Land Academy line. When you go to israeladora.com, in fact, if you just type israeladora.com, the page will appear. On that page, you'll see options to access Israeladora or the Land Academy. You click on the Land Academy, the little button where the Academy's logo is, click the Academy button, and you'll have all the information. If you get confused and can't access the website, israeladora.com, israeladoragaymail.com. Write down this email and send a message to the Academy or save this WhatsApp number. This is a WhatsApp number from here in Israel, from the office staff, and they will be happy to assist you and help you so you can learn more about Israel and the Bible. So, without further ado, I greet you from here. I hope to see you in the upcoming classes and that many of you can also be part of the online academy from here in Israel. Without further ado, I say goodbye to you, and we will continue here with the students who are present to start the Q&A session. We are going to have a little more time here for questions and answers, but for now, we say goodbye to those of you who are online with the recording. So we are going to stay here on the side in a private room for questions and answers for everyone regarding the topic we covered today. For all of you who are not yet part of the Academy, let me remind you, go ahead and join. I'll see you here, and the rest of the team and I will see you in the upcoming classes. God bless you, and see you soon. We might even see each other this month in the upcoming classes. Okay, let's end the broadcast now and go straight to the Q&A session with the rest of you who are present. Okay.